So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 2022 Investec Cape Town Art Fair Talks program. My name is Céline Soror, and I'm the co-founder of the print and digital platform, The Art Momentum. And I'm delighted to be here today, together with my colleague Faye Jackson, for our 5th year collaboration with the Investec Cape Town Art Fair. So, we had the pleasure this year to curate the talk program, and we will be hosting it together with our outstanding guest speakers and moderators. But let me also share something a bit more personal, that I am thrilled to be here today with real-life people. And after 2 years of distancing and, distancing ourselves from each other, it's really great to see people and to start old-school face-to-face chat. So useless to say that today, Zoom, Teams, and WhatsApp are not allowed. Just before handing it to Faye to introduce you to the first talk, I want to thank Laura Vincenti, the director of the Investec Cape Town Art Fair, and her team for their renewed trust. I also want to thank the guest speakers and moderators who accepted our invitation. And of course, I want to thank you for spending some time with us this afternoon. Also, maybe a few words on our intention today. And at the Art Momentum, we pay a lot of attention to share the words of artists and art professionals who contribute new perspectives on the world that we live in today and the world that we will be living in tomorrow. And for today, the guest speakers have accepted to guide us through 2 main lines of thoughts that are related to our relationship to the past and the present. And for that part of the talk program, we will be reflecting on the intimate, and we'll be exploring how personal history and experiences influence artist representation, self-representation, I should say, and contribute building shifting narratives. But today's talks will also be about our relationship to the future. And firstly, with our first talk, and through the work of artists and art professionals whose work revolve around our relationship to nature and to the environment, we'll be exploring how they address ecological and socio-political questions that are crucial to our future. Then, for our last talk, we will be diving into the metaverse and get some light on the world of non-fungible tokens, also known as NFTs. So together we will explore how NFTs are currently changing or will change the artist art practices, but also potentially the art world. So without further ado, I'm going to leave the floor to Faye to introduce the first talk, and thank you again for being here.
Thank you so much, Celine, and thank you all of you for joining us for this talks program curated by the Art Momentum. As Celine mentioned, my name is Faye Jackson, and I am the editor for the Art Momentum. And it is my pleasure to introduce our first panel for the day, which we have titled Art and Design for the Future Towards Radical and Creative Ecologies. The natural world has always been a source of inspiration for artists, and today you'll hear from a number of artists, designers, and practitioners who seek to investigate our human relationship with the natural environment by embedding their practice within it. Their work shifts the way we think about the sites of production. Rather than the studio being the sole location in which to create, these practitioners engage the natural world in a much more immediate way, either interacting with the natural environment in new ways or bringing natural materials into new settings. Please join me in welcoming our moderator for this conversation, founder of Artforms, digital platform, and Cape Town-based art historian Olivia Barrell. We are also joined by panelists Tuli Makonjo, a multidisciplinary artist from Windhoek, Namibia, and Dile Delavane, a Cape Town-based ceramic artist and the creative director and co-founder of Emiso Ceramics, Heath Nash, Heath Nash, the founder and director of Our Workshop, a community-run NPO focused on intercultural creative professional development and upcycling, as well as Marco Scottini, the artistic director for the FM Center for Contemporary Art in Milan, and the head of the Visual Arts and Curatorial Studies Department at Napa University in Rome and Milan. Without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to our moderator and our panelists. Please enjoy.
Thank you, Faye. So nice to see so many people here. And today we're going to be discussing some very interesting topics around artistic and curatorial practices going forward in the future. I'm going to give a little bit of a more in-depth intro on each one of our panelists because I think it adds a lot of depth to the conversation. But Thuli Makonjo is a Namibian multidisciplinary artist and performance artist whose work is centered around themes around Namibian identity, heritage, displacement, and loss. Andile Lavani it's a privilege to have him here. He's a South African ceramic artist whose work speaks about ritual, culture, ancestors, and also pays a lot of tribute to the natural world. So we're obviously going to be talking a lot about his beautiful ceramic works. Heath Nash runs a project and a community in Langa Township in Cape Town, which is dedicated to using materials that have previously been regarded as waste and incorporating them into objects of design and installation works in an urban environment. It's also a privilege to have Italian writer and curator Marco Scottini, who has worked with dozens of global art institutions around the world and has been involved with. He curated the Albanian Pavilion at the Venice Biennale 2015, has done 3 editions of the Prague Biennale, and curated the Chinese Biennale in 2018, which we're going to be talking a lot about. So I think let's dive into one of the major themes of today's discussion, the natural world as a source of inspiration for artists. Today, we see more and more artists who seek to investigate our human relationship with the environment by embedding their creative practice within it. So, Thuli, you were born and spent your childhood in the Angolan and Zambian refugee camps during the Namibian War of Independence. And now you use grain, a Mahanga grain, which is a staple to the Namibian diet, incorporated into your mixed media works. How did you come to incorporate grain into your practice?
Well, my first encounter with the Mahanga Field was when I returned to Namibia with my mom when I was an 8-year-old little girl, and I remember running across this Mahanga Field, and I ran to this old lady who was standing at her homestead, and she I think she noticed us coming from a distance, and then she just started ululating, and she made this beautiful sound, and I decided to just run across this Mahanga Field, this empty Mahanga Field, and I embraced my grandmother, and I think I remember grabbing her hand, and I think that was the most interesting thing I've ever seen, because I've never seen an old person when I was in the refugee camp. So I was very much fascinated by her hands, because they were like really worn and torn, and they had these deep lines. And that experience, I think it influenced my work a lot, because after that experience, I started doing artworks whereby I'm incorporating, like just drawing a bunch of lines, and I think the lines represented the hands of my grandmother and the work she did. Like all my ancestors that worked the land in the northern part of Namibia, growing the mahanga and like planting all this seed so that like we can cultivate the mahanga, and then we can pound it, and later we can turn it into porridge. So it nourishes our bodies and our souls, and I think it's very much a spiritual work when you're planting, because it's a whole process of preparing the land and then planting the seed and then the whole process of harvesting. So it took me a while to make the connection of taking that mahanga grain and incorporating it in my work as an artist, because I had like struggles between meeting my grandmother and infusing the Mahanga into my work. I lost my mom and I lost my dad, and I never really had the opportunities to, like, for example, go to school and get like a proper education art, like going to art school. But the Mahanga came like in the most unusual way, because it's just something that came. And I like to say that it could be like my ancestors that were making this connection with me, and it's just one day out of experimenting, I took the Mahanga and I was experimenting with it, and I infused it in the resin onto a piece of canvas, and it stuck. And I and I remember like just being fascinated by like, oh wow, it means that I'm incorporating my ancestors in the work. And then I started now working with the archival images that I keep getting from the National Archives of Namibia, and I would also like collect postcards that were taken by during the Deutsche Südwestafrika Namibia era, or the colonial times. And all these postcards and the images depict Namibian, like local Namibians, and they were usually made to pose in some interesting poses. Like some of them are very much stylized, and you could see like, I guess the people were also feeling very much uncomfortable, because they were forced to pose in a certain way so that I guess the German photographer can photograph them in the most pleasing way to them. And so I started incorporating these images in my work, and I'll do this technique whereby I'm doing image transfer of the postcards onto the canvases, and then adding the Mahanga, and it's fused into the resin. So then I started looking at these images, and I could sense the traumas, because you look at the expressions of the people that were depicted in the postcards or the images, and I realized that I could sense a lot of pain and a lot of trauma of the country, I guess. And so then I was thinking that, then it's talking about, I'm gonna be focusing on not only the trauma of the people, but also the trauma of the land, because the land also, it's it holds a lot of trauma, like people died on this land, people are buried in this land, in this soil, and today in Namibia, of course, we are dealing with all these colonial past traumas, and I think I'm also dealing with a lot of my own personal trauma of losing my parents and moving from all these refugee camps and settling in Namibia and trying to actually figure out what is my identity also. Like sometimes it's quite difficult to know exactly like, okay, where are you actually from? Where are you from? And I like to say that I'm from everywhere and also from nowhere, because it's kind of like still a journey. Yeah.
Thank you, Thuli. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
And I think it's very interesting how you say that you found Mahanga grain almost through your ancestors, because that ties in with you, Andile, and your spiritual connection, I would say, to the medium that you work in, which is earth. Tell us a little bit more about your relationship with clay.
Yeah, your story is very much relating and moving, and we are with you. We're working together, all of us. So I would say Kamak in acknowledging your people that brought you here, and me and everyone here right now. And speaking of the medium that I've been called to work with, which is clay, I had no choice, but growing up again, like to me in the villages, we were part of a community. We are part of a community where we mend the land, work the land, and have a livestock and take part in everything. But one of the things that we'll do as any child in the villages will be to work with clay, make objects that you would leave on the rivers. But as time went by, realizing that somehow there's a thing called art or craft, and then enroll at art school. Then I found that I can make objects that can live forever through the technologies of making them permanent by firing them. And at that time I was following what I have studied, but there was, in the process of making, I had found myself very much connected to this medium, because having worked the land, planting it, you find yourself that you feel yourself very much grounded. You feel like you're connecting again with your ancestors. And for me, I recall a time in my childhood where I used to slide down the slope into the river and find yourself collecting this clay. And I shouldn't have been doing that. I should be doing other things, but I will find myself connected to this medium, and I'll be drawn. All other kids will be left going to do what they did to do, and I'll spend as much time there losing myself. But I'll start hearing echoes and finding fossilized objects on these river banks and start interrogating them. But for me, there was little sound messages that were coming through, and I was young. I had no idea what that meant. Fast forwarding to like nowadays, whereby I took this clay object, a vessel, ingai, a beer pot, I took it to my village and gifted to my father as a way of saying, this is what I do. And the reason why I did that is because when I was growing up, we didn't have the artifacts based on the displacement again, artifacts that were taken, people were moved into from one place to the next place. So, but it was just gesture to show my father. And what then he did, he says, I cannot enjoy this alone. You need to bring the whole village at this time of the day so they can see that you have arrived. And this is very important, because I thought that I had arrived because I traveled that far. But he meant that this young man or this person who's going to help us to remember who we are or who we've been, what we have lost, who's going to bring dignity to us as a tribe, as a people, through bringing these memories through this vessel. So what that happened is that the elders in the community started saying, you young men, you are going to be the one who's going to bring back dignity to this society, to these people, because of this clay that you're touching. Because what you did, you touched onto our ancestors. They communicated and talked to you so you can speak to us, to remind us who we are. And little did I know that the messages and the whispers I was hearing when I was a child, they were preparing me for that moment. And that's the connection that I have with and I'm using now clay to be able to communicate and heal the traumas, past traumas of my generations through this medium, by not only making these beautiful objects, but integrating them in the ceremonies that we do, from sound to using them as well.
And you don't only use the natural world, Earth, as a medium, but you also reference and pay homage to the natural world. And I recently wrote about your work that your pieces are imbued with a profound reverence for the Earth in all its natural forms. Smooth boulder, eroded soil, rocky cliff, stone crevice, captured in movement and spirit. Each work resonates with contemplation on the natural environment in which Diavani finds himself, layering one on top of the other over time like layers of skin. In many ways, you showcase the natural world in your works. Can you talk about the natural world as a source of inspiration for you?
Thank you. Yes, that's a beautiful, beautiful writing, I must say. and I can only make the work. I cannot speak or write like you do. So it's up to you how to interpret that. But to explain this process and how, and it takes me back to that riverbank, that sliding down that slope, where I found myself paying homage to my childhood playground, the dongas. And that's how that textures, the clay itself, applying on top of each other, creating embossing effect of footprint as if there's fossilized object to basically say, we are here and I'm paying homage, and using the textures of the tree bark into these objects. It's basically trying to freeze the moment And so the next generation can learn about who we are, what we have done as well. And I think that's one way of saying the earth, we respect it, and it holds so much history and wisdom for us, and so much that we can learn from it. And me being part of that as well, it's saying that today what I'm doing, the next generation will be able to learn and continue where I'm learned from as well.
Thank you. And Marco, if I can just ask you a question from a curatorial point of view. You, over the past few years, have been very focused on our relationship between cultural spaces and the natural environment. And recently, in 2018, for the Yinchuan Biennale in China, you talked about taking ecology to its edge. And I thought perhaps you could define what you think radical and creative ecologies are for us.
Thank you, Olivia. And the microphone. Function? Okay. So thank you, Olivia, and let me thank before Laura Vincenti, the director of Cape Town Art Fair, and Riccardo Mandrini for the art fair as well, together with Matteo Fazzi, the director of the Italian Cultural Institute from Pretoria and the Italian Embassy here in Cape Town. So thanks for inviting me here and for this opportunity. And in relation to the topic of today, yes, I was invited in 2018 to create an exhibition biennial in the Gobi Desert. So it was a surprise at a certain time, but also was totally challenging and inspiring, as of course the topic was ecology, and in which way we can think about ecology within the desert. No? So especially in the Chinese context, where everything is so artificial in a sort of way. So the task of the state is to transform sand in grass. No, that is the main task. And also, you can imagine in Yinchuan, where the Mocha Yinchuan was, is a smart city, but you at the same time, you can find camels outside and other kind of traditional custom and habits. So it was really strange to work in that occasion. And especially for me, because of course I wanted to focus on about the natural environment and cultural environment starting from the 1994, because I started my curatorial activity with gardens, and so commissioning to artists to do some private and public gardens, so involving them directly with the natural elements and the public space as well. And but one of my favorite methodology is the archaeological one. And so when I arrived in Yinchuan and the Gobi Desert, it was a shock in a proper way, because in which way I could find a way to deal with the historical topic as well, not only the natural landscape or the desert, you know, in a sort of way. And then I discovered a lot in relation to, a possible archaeology of that context, because also we imagine the desert as a monolithic shape in something not connected with the human life or with the life in itself, because it's an extreme spot in relation to inhabit this kind of environment. And at the same time, I discovered that Yinchuan was one of the last stations of the ancient Silk Road. So it was a special spot for hybridization of people, animals, races, religions, spices, goods, cultural form, and languages as well. And so I started to think that that was the key, in order to open or to develop something in connection with the idea of the desert, because it was a theater of fluxes in the past. And this kind of fluxes was possible to discover once again when I was there for the Inchuan biennial. So that was amazing, because I changed in a sort of way totally my point of view in respect to an idea of ecology. So the subtitle is, the title is starting from the desert, and the subtitle is Ecologies on the Edge, because of course is a Chinese border, northwest Chinese border, in which, of course, the border is between the sandy or the steppe on the north with the Mongolia, and also the desert on the west with the Xinjiang province. And the area is a wet area at the same time. So of course was something really connected with the, not an urban environment, but the rural environment, and with a nomadic space at the same time. And so, starting from a Dutch film director that I like a lot, like Joris Ivans in the name, he did his last film when he was 90, about the desert and about the wind. A Tale of the Wind is the title of his last movie. And so, of course, for me, the desert was the theater of the wind. No? And so, for this reason, it was really inspiring to think to the French philosophers Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari, and what they call nomadic science. And that it was really was the key in order to open this environment, because the wind, the fluxes, the transformation, the permanent transformation of things is something really connected with the modern idea of ecology. And instead, if we still want to continue to think to the state science, what they call state science, of course, is our legacy, is our connection with the idea of a science, but is something really unconnected with the idea of ecology. So when today we speak about climate change and warming, etc., and at the same time we claim science as a solution and technology as well as a solution, I think we are in a totally bad direction. Then, for this reason, I wanted to create also a model, an exhibition model, an eco-model of exhibition with the Inchuan Biennial, in which everything was interconnected with a mutual entanglement between heterogeneous elements like animals. You can find a short guide, a page with birds, for example, because I wanted to include animals like workers, like artists in the exhibition, and at the same time, of course, not only the natural environment, but the historical environment, the mental environment, the social environment, etc. So for this reason, ecologies in the plural. And at the same time, you can imagine the border is always something really connected with the idea of biodiversity. But when we talk about biodiversity, we have to keep in mind that we are dealing with human beings, with animals, with form of thinking, with languages, etc. So that was the main idea behind, my curatorial idea behind the biennial.
Thank you, Marco. And very interesting that you brought up this notion of nomadism, which you're obviously very interested in for your curatorial practices. And we talked about it with you, Tuli, earlier, this idea of connection to land and also cultural identity and how the two are linked. How have you found it possible to incorporate both land and your ideas around Namibian cultural identity into your works?
You know, I thought a lot about obviously the history of the country and and how the people in Namibia are related to the land, and how we currently, we're struggling. We also have like land issues whereby obviously the majority of people in Namibia who own land is obviously the white people, and they and the native or like the local people of Namibia. We literally don't own any land because so it's like, so then I was thinking about that, and I was I decided that I guess the only people that really own land, when you really think about it, is when you go to the northern part of Namibia and you live in a village and you have your I guess your Mahanga Field or your maize field, and then that's your land. But when you talk about communal land or like commercial land, if you go to the southern part of Namibia, that's obviously owned by the white Namibians, and they own like hectares upon hectares of land. And today we're dealing with issues of land, like like this whole government initiatives where they're trying to ask the white settlers to give, or to sell most of their land so that it can be redistributed. But I think there's now issues whereby obviously the new owners, the new black owners, they're also facing issues of, if you get that land, that commercial land from the south, somewhere in the south, will you be able to actually work on that land? Will you be able to cultivate? Do you know how to plant, or to have livestock on that land? And I don't know if it's really well thought out, because you can have the land, but do you actually know what to do with the land, and how you're going to contribute to the economy of the country if you don't even know like how to take care of the livestock? And so then I was thinking that it's important that I kind of go back and do my research with the archival images and to see where it started, because most Namibians, I guess the older generations, they know exactly what happened, how these land issues came about, but then the new generation, they don't really understand what's actually happening, or why the majority of the colonial settlers, I don't know, the children owning this land. And I was just thinking that maybe if there's a lot of evidence within the images, and because you could also see already in those archival images that the local Namibian people were living like foreigners within their own land. They were made to, everybody was separated, of course, because that's a way to break the, if you separate the people, then they will not have that strength to fight back. And you could see they were living in makeshift structures as their homes. And so when I'm working with these pictures, I'm actually learning a lot about the history of the land and the history of the country and land distribution, and how people were grouped into little camps and areas. And I mean, today in Namibia, we have areas where, everybody's put in an area and then it's named after your tribe. For example, the northern part is named Ovambo land. It's like the place where the Ovambo people are staying, or Damara land. And so it's quite interesting how, all that separation, and you can actually see it in the work, through the archival images. And
Your practice uses archival images almost to reference a sense of past, present, and then future, which is also very linked to your practice, Andile. Referencing past, present, and future in terms of approaching what national identity is and what it means to you. Marco, maybe just a difficult question, but from a curatorial point of view, how do you capture a sense of national identity?
But I try to, anyway, to give an answer as before as well, no? But I like very much the idea of working with archival material I'm very familiar with. And I choose the topic of archive as a format of exhibition making as well. And what I think in relation to, now everyone is able to say that the archive is not a format, but it's a sort of trend in contemporary art scene around the world. But that is true as not true at the same time, because I think that we are dealing with another totally different concept of history, no? And from my point of view, history is not archive. They are something that are, of course, connected, but they are not overlapping in a sort of way. Because in respect to the archival material, you can re-archive and de-archive everything in different times. But history in itself, in a historical construction, and a Western construction as well. And so what I think our idea of the past, the present, and future is really connected with our idea of history as a social, a white, Western construction. And so when we speak about archival material, I think that is the reason. And that is the reason in order also to dismantle, I mean, the idea of identity in itself, or better, an essentialistic idea of identity. Now, when I spoke before about nomad science, of course, nomad science is not a state science. And the state science, the science as such, I can say, is the one that was able to found, I mean, the idea of the national identity, or the identity in respect to gender, the identity in respect to cultural and nature. But you can imagine in which way it's possible to imagine a nature without human beings, and so without an history, and at the same time the cultural point of view with human beings that are part of history, but they are not part of nature. So it's a strong contradiction in itself. And this is strictly connected with the idea of modern idea of ecology from my point of view, because of course we need to work, we must work with the new idea of history, with the new idea of identity, and with the new idea of the social belonging, or I mean gender belonging, etc., because they are not a part anymore of our social life or real life. No, it's an ideological construction. So I think, of course, they are really crucial issues of today, but we have to rethink in a paradigmatic way everything. For this reason, I think the idea of nomad science is really connected with an aesthetical point of view. Instead, state science is really connected with a scientific paradigm.
Thank you, Marco. That's very interesting. And I think the link in this conversation is really between human and earth. And Heath, you've been very quiet there, so maybe we'll just move on to a slightly different landscape, which is an urban landscape, because your work, our workshop, deals very much with our connection to an urban landscape. And you take materials that are supposedly waste materials, and you repurpose them to do installations in an urban environment and create products. So maybe you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. I mean, in terms of our workshop as a space, that's where it starts. It's supposed to be a space for people from different backgrounds to connect. So it's interracial, intercultural connection, which I don't think we have enough of in this country, maybe in this city. And my story is one of privilege. I grew up with a space to work in, and I had access to materials. And so what I wanted to start was something where emerging talent in Langa Township could have first space to work, and then tools and materials to work with. And then because waste is free, that's kind of the easiest thing to work with. So it's all about this idea of taking what's available, what's around, and collectively making something new. So the whole frame of the work is, how do you create this kind of ecology? It is an ecology of people. And how do you make especially with such vast differences in background. And I mean, really, working in the township is so amazing. It's fascinating. We live in different, I mean, I grew up in a different world to the people I work with. And I've been there for 4 years, and I'm still learning more about the difference in culture. And I think we need to talk about that. And it needs to be part of our South African journey, because I think that kind of thing is often quite ignored. And it's really important, I think.
And Heath, can you tell us just a little bit about the projects on the screen and how they are conceptualized?
This was a great project. We worked with an architecture studio called The Mark, and they run an event called Follies in the Veld. And this was their urban Follies in the Veld. They normally use kind of other natural spaces. And we managed to get a hold of a lot of Tetra Paks. So that's waste, milk boxes, juice boxes, that kind of thing. And as a group, we explored the material together. It was all done over a weekend. So it was Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Some people that weren't from Langa were in attendance, and then the group of our workshop members. And it was just this amazing experience of collaboratively all learning and creating something completely fresh that none of us had any idea of before it started. And then installing it in a public space in Langa. So it was an amazing experience. When it went up, it was very beautiful, because everyone was there. The people from Langa, the kids were playing, we were there, we invited, friends and family to the event, and it was really special. This was something we did with thinking, and it was for the Western Cape government in the building in town. And it was really about raising awareness about how much stuff goes to landfill. And this was, it was just before lockdown happened. And it was actually, I think it's very beautiful. And it's just, it's a lot of bottles.
I should have one more for you here.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, so that's milk bottles, and these are objects made of milk bottles. But each person at our workshop has a different, interest. So it's a space for emergent design, emergent artwork, and also that space in between craft design and art, where, I think it's a liminal space. It's a strange space, but I think it's important. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Heath. And Andile, I just would love to ask you a question about your recent exhibition and just this idea of taking art and having it in an actual space. So like you said, Marco, sort of breaking down the curatorial boundaries of how we think we can exhibit and experience art. And Andile, maybe you could tell us a little about your last exhibition and the ceremony that you had in your village with the pieces.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, this is still, when I'm thinking about it, I still shake, and because of the reaction of the people when they experience the work itself, as they were reminded of the stuff, objects and activities that they've done. This was very important because I'm based here in Cape Town, and my work travels in a lot of places and celebrated in a lot of places. And I come from that village, from that landscape, from that community. And they played a role for me to be able to sit and stand here and have my work celebrated everywhere else. And so it was very important, like I had to take that pot, the clay pot, to my father for them to say, you're the one who's going to bring dignity and remind us of who we are. So why this was important was that my work has always been celebrated in the galleries, in the museums, and every other place. And we've been going through the pandemic and everything. People are suffering spiritually. they lost hope, they lost jobs, they lost their loved ones. And the gift that I was given is the whispers of the work that I was creating, the energy I had. It was very important for me to share that energy, that hope, that love of the work or the messages from my ancestors, because that's what I believe when I saw the visions of the work needed to be created, despite the fact that we were blocked not to do anything, but I had to do it. So that was very important for me to say it cannot be anywhere else before, but it needs to go home. So all these works had to travel. Southern Guild, we had to take it to the Eastern Cape. And the most importantly was that the work was not finished in the studio. Being there, the traveling, the energy of the work with the people that pack and transported the work. When we arrived and unpacking the work, kids started crawling on these pieces. That was the making of the work. That was what it was meant for. People were ululating and singing and dancing and crying because they say, this is us. And having the work in the kraal where we do the ceremonies, or in the yard, or in the ground where the community sit and gather, having people sit and interact and smoke and manure and the soil, the earth of my home and my village, the rain that fall, the sounds that we sing and dance as we vibrating, that was making of the work. And it couldn't have been anywhere else. It's one of those things because I was facing that I wish I would have left all of that there, but it was important that the energy and essence of that work, of the people that sat and interacted with it, can be felt, read, spoken, and be experienced by people all over the world who interact with this work, because the essence of it is there. That was important. And to a point where, because of, again, why that we need to be reminded of who we are is because of the displacement we speak about, where I had to take one of the objects and place it in the burial ground of my forefathers as a way of paying homage, not only to them, but to those who were displaced all over the world. So that now what we do, that piece that is sitting there in that gravesite, any member of the village goes and commune around it and celebrate and meditate around it in remembering their past through that object that I created through the vision and memories. But that's the making, that's interaction, that's making the work accessible or do the job of healing in the sense. And that was what Itong was about. Thank you.
Amazing, and we took... Oh, okay. Thank you, Andile. That's very interesting to talk about the interaction between artworks and people. And Mark, I would have loved to have asked you another question about how you get around those challenges as a curator. But I think we have to stop now and open up the room to any questions. Yes, question in the front.
I think it's good afternoon. It's perhaps not a question, just an input that Sis Tuli, you evoke something very important in me because as Marco said, that there's a difference between archive and history, because I think history is more involved. And that I think it is a subject that perhaps is more pronounced in the way that you present your work, because in the pages of history, there's an important page about the genocide in Namibia that wiped out over half of the population of the Nama and the Vambo, and part of what happened during that genocide was the appropriation of some of the body parts of the warrior kings and queens that fought in the war with the Germans. And many of them were beheaded, and their skulls were taken to various institutions in Germany and also other institutions in Europe. But along with those skulls were also, precious, what they call artifacts. But these were really not really artifacts in the sense. They were, like Andile says, they were products of a spiritual process because there's a sacredness to some of the works that were taken, because those works were not for commercial consumption or even for other consumption, but they had a sacredness attached to them. And I know that Namibia has been sort of engaged on the repatriation of those works. Now, the value of that is that in those works lies very important clues about our identity, about our history. And I always challenge this question about, what are natives going to do with the land when they get it? But it shouldn't be the business of the settlers, what the natives do with the land, because it's their land to decide what they do with it, And also, there's this narrow focus on, when it comes to the land question, about the land being just for farming. The land has got a much more sacred meaning for Africans, There's so much inspiration. I mean, if you look at your work and Andile's work and how it connects to the land, that's one of the significant values that the land carries for us as natives. And nobody explores that as a use for the land, and how it infuses us to express our identity and make it more pronounced for generations to come. So I think your work is very important. Thank you, Andile, for always reminding us and bringing out those clues about not just remembering cognitively, but remembering and bringing back those pieces together. Thank you.
Anyone else have a question? Let's go back here.
Thank you, and thanks for the beautiful insights in the talk. Maybe just back to the topic of the talk, because it talked about thinking about these things retrospectively, but it also talked about the future, and it referred to a radical future. And it'd be very interesting to hear, maybe in the context of Tuli's view and maybe Heath's view as well, as what is that radical future, and how do you want communities to interpret your work, and what do you want them to do with it going forward?
So is that for me? Sorry, what was the question again?
Well, it was for you and for Heath. I think it was because it gives a nice sort of blend to the sort of to the urban and to the land. The question is very simple: is the talk is about a radical future?
Yes.
So if you look at the way you've interpreted the past and how you've acknowledged and recognized that, what do you want the world to take out of the work into the future? How would you like, not from a subjective point of view, but from an objective point of view, what do you want them to do with it going forward?
I think what I want to do with it is for the Namibian people to, to seek healing, and for us to really return to the land. And I know, actually the San people, they're very much connected to the land, in the sense that there are some areas, like if you go to the Brandberg or Spitzkoppe, there are some areas that are very much sacred to them, and that not everyone can just go there. You can't just go there and say, okay, I'm going in this cave and explore. The San people, or the San guides, they will tell you, like, no, you cannot go in this cave because it's very sacred to us. It's a very special place for our ancestors, and the energies in there are very much intense. So I think I really want us to get back to that, to what we used to be, to who we are, to the roots, where we came from. And I think with my work, I'm trying to open up a dialogue so we can start talking about healing, like returning to the land, and to seek healing from the land, because we are from the land, and we are made of land, and we are going to return to the land. So yeah, that's actually what I want for my work. And I think I'm working a lot on it right now because I'm trying to, like, when I'm embroidering on top of the archival images, I'm trying to embroider the traumas that we experience as Namibians and the traumas of the land, and that we need to, we can't just talk about the people and the, like in our bodies, but we have to also to get back inside and understand our traumas and to think about, to start healing and to start, just the process of healing.
Sure.
Yeah.
Also, I totally agree with you on that. Yeah. I mean, Radical Future, every township should have multiple creative spaces for people to express themselves and heal. Because creative practice is a space for experimentation, thinking, and also if you're making things together, which is what the point is, you get to learn about each other. So, I think black people in this country live through trauma on a daily basis, still. And it's just, I think that there needs to be spaces that people can connect and learn about each other, but, because it's really important for the future to be allowed to enable spaces like that, I think.
Thank you so much, Heath. There was one more question, and then we are unfortunately going to have to close the session. Was you?
Okay, so I think it's I think my questions are typically quite long, so I'm going to try and shorten it a bit, but I thought maybe to connect to the last one, maybe not on Radical Future, but on visions, and I think it's a word that all the three practitioners have spoken of, and so maybe like just one or two could each say something, and then also then focusing back to Heath a little bit. Just in terms of like where with Andile, when you do have these community gatherings, then it's obviously not just your vision, but this community vision arises, and where you see that coming forward and connecting that into the land or her future. And then just with Heath, also just because it's an urban context that I found quite interesting, where there's a lot lacking from nature, and the connection there, but the creative process innately brings up these visions, these inner messages, or just one's creativity and thinking, like you said. And so I was just wondering what kind of themes and traumas and identity that these bring up, and if there are any running themes within it as a community, and how it reflects in both art and product. It's a bit of a different space, being like craft, product, and commercial and urban. So just how these themes arrive and where you see a bridge to something larger, and also how in the Western side of things, if we are going to speak of that, or in the global context of climate change and of people's identities being questioned, and people wanting to connect, if there are threads there that are apparent to you, if you could share those.
I don't even know if I'm going to be answering your question, but all I can say at this stage is that what I do and what we do as a community and as a space at Emiso, the studio, we're creating a home. We're trying to forge an identity. We're creating a safe space whereby we can connect and invite any other person to be able to learn who we are. We can learn each other. I mean, as I said earlier, when we had a conversation with Heath about what he's doing at Alanga, that I take my hat off for him. The reason being is that he spends 4 years trying to learn, and still today, he acknowledged that he has not learned anything. He doesn't know anything. He's still learning till today. But so far, what he's learned is that there's so much that we have not known of each other in terms of the different races. So to my point as well is that when I took this offering to my village, I invited a couple of my white friends. One of them is here and a couple of them are here. And the reason for that was to give them an insight of what their ancestors have done to that land, and not to say that they carry that bandit, because that's not the case. it's only a reminder. We need to talk about this thing so we can forge a better future with an understanding of what has happened, why I act and react the way that I react, why I behave in the way that I behave because of what has been done. So the point then, what I'm trying to say is that the work creates a dialogue. We're not going to solve it now, but me and you and everyone else who's in this room today of experience my work and everyone's work now ought to remember this so you can move forward. And that's what the work is supposed to be about. Thank you.
Sweetheart. Would you mind trying to condense what you asked?
What sort of inner visions or questions do these come up when people are making, when you're in the studio and they're making, like, so is there like certain people who are now going on, like as an example, going on identity, doing more closer stuff, or is there someone doing more nature stuff? Are there these types of questions that are coming up that like link to what everyone else is saying? In terms of ecologies or in terms of one's own ecology and one's own
The thing about it is that everyone's really desperate to make money and feed their family. So everyone's looking to sell objects, and unfortunately it can lead to quite a short-term sort of look at everything. But people at least have the space to start to make, and we can start to talk about these things. Definitely each person has his or her own path that they're going on. And yeah, I mean, it's all about this thing of compassion and empathy and, all that soft, it's like not soft really, is it? But that stuff, which is lacking, I think, a lot. Yeah.
Thank you, Heath. Thank you, Olivia. Thank you, Tuli, Andile, and Marco. This is the end of this first talk. I also want to take the opportunity to thank the Italian consulate of Cape Town, and the Cultural Institute of Italy in Pretoria for being here today and making this talk program possible. They are, in fact, inviting us to a cocktail outside of this room just right now, and that could be a great opportunity to continue connecting with the speakers. And